Welcome in to the Cover 5 show. I am your host, Jordan Vanek. You can find me over on Twitter at Jordan Vanek DFS. My co-host is Mark Garcia. You can find him on Twitter at HiLoFF. Hilo, are you excited that football is getting closer and closer, and we are just a few days away from week 1?
A little bit. My excitement has been tempered by Jeff Wilson hitting the IR. No, I'm just kidding. No,
Oh,
dude, I'm stoked.
speaking of Jeff Wilson, today's show, we will be breaking down running backs and defenses. I felt like they paired really well together. And just overall, this slate, there's a lot of overpriced, underpriced running backs just because they release the pricing so early. And now we know how these rosters look with Jonathan Taylor going to the IR, Jeff Wilson beginning on the IR, might not even play this upcoming season. Maybe the pup, actually, not IR specifically. If you haven't already, subscribe to the show, subscribe to all our podcasts. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, now on YouTube with these brand new shows where you can see our faces. And on the website right now, we got a ton of fantasy football rankings. I know your fantasy drafts might be drafting this weekend, so take a look. Josh and Ryan and all of our contributors have done an amazing job releasing his rankings, different points of view from different perspectives. But let's kick it off, Hilo. We're going to start in the 7K and above tier. You chose a player that was $100 less than 7K, but I won't, blame you here. Tell me about Travis Etienne.
Yeah, I cheated a little bit on these salary ranges that you gave me, but Travis Etienne is priced at 6.9. And when you think about, again, like the theoretics behind what the field is likely to do for week 1, we're likely to see the salary available to pay up at one running back position. And because we have a ton, which we're going to get to here shortly, we have a ton of running backs in the around 5K to 6,500 range, which is kind of the sweet spot when you're looking at historical production at the running back position. And we're talking, of course, historical production as in like GPP type winner production. So that said, Travis Etienne is weirdly priced right above that range, the heart of running back historic pricing, and the pay up tier, which we consider about 7K and up, priced at 6,900. And he's playing an Indianapolis Colts team that we have almost no idea of what to expect from their defense to their offense to how effective they're going to be on either side of the ball to kind of what their main goal on defense is going to be, which we know can change year to year. So it's kind of this idea of, I don't know. And it also has, I guess, it has to do with the steam that the other backfield mates have been getting, primarily Tank Bigsby, in Jacksonville. So we're likely to see that all snowball into, he's probably not going to garner a ton of interest on this slate, but he's still a guy. And the general mindset that I go into at running back is based on today's NFL game. We need one of two things to provide a GPP worthy score. We need access to 100 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns, or we need enough passing volume to offset the need for one of those touchdowns. And that's just primarily for DK specifics and like how the dynamics of the NFL have changed recently, where we're moving away from the team jam them in, the ultra workhorse running backs, the David Johnsons, the Le'Veon Bells. We're no longer there anymore in how the game is played. So now GPP worthy scores pretty much come from 100 yards, getting the bonus, and 2 touchdowns. That puts you right around 30 fantasy points, and that's kind of the sweet spot for GPP worthy scores. So with that, does Travis Etienne carry 102 upside in Indianapolis against a Colts team that we really don't know much about? I would argue, hell yes, he does. So it's kind of that idea of like, finding those players that have the path to what is important at the position that are going to not garner a lot of interest. And he's kind of peak of that list for week 1.
Especially with like the news about Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley. Calvin had a big catch in that Dolphins game against Noah Ngogbe, who is no longer with the Miami Dolphins. I am someone who stacked Trevor Lawrence early on, but I'm interested to see what we see from a rostership percentage perspective. How popular are they going to be? I do think Etienne is one of those guys that, again, you talked about the way the modern day running backs are going, and it's like, this is one of the few running backs in football right now where he does not need 20 touches to hit over 100 yards. Yeah. And in this slate, in week 1 in particular, like majority of running backs are healthy, so it's going to be a committee. And speaking of the committee, I'm going to parlay this into Christian McCaffrey, who's the running back that I'm going to talk about. He was 8,700 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I remember 2 years ago, I had a rule: if Christian McCaffrey's under 9,000, you got to play him. Like, he was the guy that was going to get 30 plus touches. There's just not many running backs that are like it. There was a report today about how they're going to limit his touches, which makes sense for the 49ers and the way that they're structured. But in this particular game, the Pittsburgh Steelers, man, they're one of the most impressive teams in preseason. But more importantly, that defense is going to get after this 49ers offensive line. 49ers have Trent Williams, which is probably the best tackle in football right now. But outside of that, I am very concerned with how their offensive line is going to function in this game. You have Cam Hayward, you have TJ Watt, you have Alex Highsmith. And on the back end, the Steelers are just a much improved defense who also just picked up Desmond King for free. Desmond King is a slot guy that it was a big glaring hole for them when me and you did our breakdowns over the coverages. And now they kind of have that filled. They have depth at the cornerback position, and they're allowing Minka to play more freely. In this game in particular, I think McCaffrey is the first running back that I'm talking about as a player that I don't care how rostered he's going to be. I'm going to be away from him. If he's sub 10%, yes, I'm going to have some interest. But with his name and the way the state of the running backs are, I expect him to be over 10%, probably in the 15% range, if I had to guess in week one, where, again, when we get down to some of these later guys, we know that some of them are going to be popular because they just open the door for salary. Do you have any thoughts on McCaffrey?
Yeah, kind of that whole offense. Like, you look at what I know this we're focusing on running backs, but you look at what we expect from like George Kittle. It's like, well, in matchups where they're kind of overpowered along the offensive line, they typically keep them in to block a little bit more. Debo Samuel, kind of this gadgety type guy that relies solely, or I guess primarily, on efficiency. So yeah, it's kind of hard to go anywhere in that game environment where more than likely we're going to see a game environment that is played to this kind of slugfest type game environment. So yeah, that I'd agree with that call wholeheartedly.
So, speaking of a team that usually likes to play in a slugfest, but I think they're moving towards a passing style of things, your next running back that you wanted to talk about is Nick Chubb. So I'll let you take it away, and I'm interested to see what you have to say.
Yeah, Nick Chubb is his price is the third highest running back as far as salary goes. But what's most interesting to me is the game environment in which he's playing against a Bengals team where Joe Burrow's back at practice. We can expect them to be kind of firing on all cylinders. And the uncertainty associated with the Cleveland offense. We don't really know. We know historically what Nick Chubb has provided, right? He's kind of this 60% snap rate guy, primary rusher, not overly involved in the pass game. But it's like they really did nothing to address the running back room outside of bringing in Pierre Strong like 3 days ago. We know that Jerome Ford is kind of banged up. He's back at practice, but he's banged up as well. So this is a spot where we could get access to one of the better, we might even call him the best pure runner in the game of football right now, with the potential to see additional work through the pass game. So like I talked about earlier, 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Nick Chubb very much within his range of outcomes, even against a somewhat stingy Cincinnati run game, or I guess run defense. But the kicker here is like that access to the potential for additional work through the air. So Chubb, when you start getting up to these high price guys, that 102 is kind of like your baseline. You like, they're not even going to sink a roster if they put up 102 with no pass game work, because 30 points at 8.2K is far different than 30 points at 5.2K. But these are the guys that can really separate from the field and put up the scores that you had to have or you weren't winning anything. And Chubb is an interesting player to consider for that this week.
So Joe Burrow is becoming my favorite quarterback on the slate. I know it's not like a hot take or anything like that, but it's just the state of this game tells me it's going to be similar to the Wink Martindale Ravens versus the Bengals. And in a sense of Jim Schwartz is going to be blitzing, and Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow have that huge opportunity on that side. And then running it back with Nick Chubb seems like the play to me, because also the loss of safeties of Jesse Bates and Von Bell what they did in the run game, in particular, Von Bell, just filling a lot of those gaps and stuff. I know
Yeah.
their front seven is, been there, done that. They've been a part of it. But on the back end, are they going to be able to stop the big play from happening? Because Nick Chubb has ran all over this defense in recent years, and they've had no answer no matter who's been healthy. So I do love that game environment where I'm playing Burrow and I'm playing Chase and I'm getting Nick Chubb, even if it's a very popular stack. I think there's a lot of unique options and ways I can get different according to the field based on some of the other guys that we're going to be getting to. And Mina Kimes actually had a great stat that I remember seeing and just had to pull it up. That's what I was searching for. Obviously, with Deshaun Watson, one of the formation or shotgun, I guess, ways he's been used is in the pistol. Nick Chubb last year in these formations, first in yards per carry, first in rushing yards over expected per carry, and third in EPA per play. So this is a very great fit in the way that they can run their zone running scheme. The offense line is there, and it helps Deshaun Watson be able to throw the ball when Nick Chubb is running it well. I do believe he's going to see one of the higher snap shares just because of the state of their backfield. And I mean, I don't think he can handle it. Like, I feel like early
Yeah.
on in the season, let's get this going. And then if you feel the need to, they can still bring back Kareem Hunt, who isn't signed anywhere at the moment. But that's all I have for the Nick Chubb. The next guy I wanted to talk about is another running back that I think is in an interesting matchup. I can't wait to see how popular he's going to be. It's Austin Ekeler at $8,400. Miami is converted to the Vic Fangio scheme. Me and you have talked about this extensively throughout this offseason. What Vic Fangio wants to do is invite you to run the football. Austin Ekeler is a guy that has made a lot of money through his production in the passing game. A lot of people have made, like fantasy wise, have dominated with Ekeler because he's just been such a high targeted running back in a position that those points are more valuable than carries. Just obviously, you get your point per reception, and it's led to a lot of monster weeks. In this particular matchup, they're changing to Kellen Moore. So Kellen Moore doesn't historically throw to running backs at the rate that Lombardi did. Lombardi was a guy that came over from the Sean Payton scheme, and it felt like he just took Alvin Kamara's role and just input him to Austin Ekeler. High touchdowns and high usage in the passing game. I'm not sure Kellen Moore is going to do that. This game environment is going to be the most popular game on the slate. It's got all the pieces of a big shootout to be expected, and we have some cheaper guys we're going to get to a little bit later on there. But overall, with Ekeler in this matchup, I think his carries could be a little bit higher, but I'm still not seeing him being the pass catching guy that he has been in the past, which makes him a person that I'm not really targeting week one in DFS, even though he's, again, similar to Nick Chubb. The backup is a big question mark, but they kept 4 running backs, in particular that rookie on or UDFA that had the big runs. I think his name's like Dotson is his last name or something like that, that
Yeah.
made some big plays there. I'm not sure if he's going to be on the active roster week one, but I think they could try to spell Ekeler a little bit, which makes it an interesting week one. Just I'm not playing the top tier running backs. How do you feel about Ekeler?
Yeah, I mean, you look at Eckler's usage last year. Even he had a 65% snap rate, was right around there in team opportunity share out of the backfield. So this is a guy that has thrived on pass game usage and efficiency. We don't really know if that's going to continue in a new offensive coordinator scheme. But yeah, very, very interesting. Clearly has the tools to perform on non-elite volume, which he's done over the previous 2 seasons. But yeah, it's difficult to buy into that, especially in week one where we have so many other options when there's significant number of unknowns.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we just talked about a new offensive coordinator changing things in LAC with Kellen Moore. Now you bring up a running back that I am in love with until I saw Sean Tucker play like Sean Tucker at Syracuse, but I believe he went down with a little bit of a hammy issue in that last game of the preseason. I love Sean Tucker. So I wanted to hear what you have to say about Rashad White, who should dominate the touches at least early on in the season.
Yeah, and this is another nod to the game environment in which he's playing. If we expect Minnesota to be successful, how do we expect Tampa Bay to respond? Well, they're highly likely to kind of throw their coming in game plan, which we have no idea what it is, but they're probably going to throw that relatively out the window. And when you look at the state of the pass catchers in Tampa Bay, they have an established Mike Evans who is dealing with a hamstring injury. He's back at practice, but that's been an issue, soft tissue stuff for Mike Evans in the past. They have Chris Godwin. They have a second-year tight end in Cade Otton, who is looking, based on preseason usage, to be an every down tight end. And then they have Rashad White, and that's really it. Yes, they have Trey Palmer, who is going to be stepping in for Russell Gage, likely going to be starting on the perimeter in 11 personnel. But we also look at kind of who Baker Mayfield is, and he has one of the highest career running back target rates of any quarterback in the league, and over the last 10 years. So all those things kind of come together. Is how do we expect Tampa Bay to respond when they're punched in the mouth? And if we know that volume is the highest predictive metric for fantasy production at the running back position, we have a running back here who is basically, it appears, I think you're right, that the undrafted free agent rookie is going to be entering the season as the number 2. He's coming off an injury. He has all this stuff, whatever, working against him. But if he is established as the number 2 on the depth chart, that I like that perspective for Rashad White as far as expected workload goes early in the season. So, I mean, he has access to a 16 to 18 rush attempt and 10 target game. Like, that's the kind of upside that he has within his range of outcomes. So getting that at 5,500 could open up a lot around the rest of the roster. I don't know how high his expected rostership is going to be. Probably not very high. But an interesting way to play this is to do a skinny stack with a member of the Minnesota Vikings. You don't even have to buy into that entire game environment. But if Minnesota succeeds, it's going to come from somebody, whether that's TJ Hawkinson or JJ or any number of playmakers that they have on their offense now. It's going to come from somebody. And if that happens, how is Tampa Bay going to respond when they're punched in the face?
I love Rashad White. I think he's not going to be popular personally. Even with his expected usage, I think that the aura around the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is this offense is bad. So we're not playing bad players or players on a bad offense, not necessarily bad players. I do think Rashad White, coming out of college, he was a dominant receiving back. And then I just pulled it up. Obviously, it's Christian McCaffrey. I know the Carolina Panthers, but when Baker Mayfield started for the Panthers last year, McCaffrey had a 24% target share with Baker on the field. And then he went over to the Rams, and Cam Akers had a 10% target share. Cam Akers is not the profiles as the receiving back the way that Rashad White has been. And I do think that the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay is going to use him a lot and feature him as much as he can. I think Sean Tucker is a guy that would scare me to go extremely overweight on Rashad White, but for week 1 with the uncertainties that we have at 5,500, it's a perfectly fine price to buy in. There's a lot of running backs in this tier that I think are going to be played at a high level. And the one that I'm going to be talking about next is Miles Sanders, 5,600 against the Atlanta Falcons. For starters, I want to throw out all of the Atlanta Falcon metrics from last year. Just get rid of it because it does not matter. They are at home. They're going to play slow. And with the way that the Panthers looked this in particular preseason, I do not expect us to be in a lot of spots to be running the ball. If Miles Sanders is popular, he's going to be the biggest fade for me on this particular slate, just because the Falcons added 2 pieces, David Onyemata and Calais Campbell, up to that front. And they're switching to more of a 3-4 hybrid type front. It's a defense that we haven't seen outside of the preseason. And in the preseason, the way they were rotating safeties, the complications of this defense or complexity of this defense is going to be something that I expect to be a lot better than the consensus idea of the Atlanta Falcons. And with that, they're at home. It's a rookie quarterback, and I know Bryce Young is someone that is intellectual, higher level than most of the quarterbacks that have come out. He's going to be able to do some things. We don't exactly have the group of playmakers to make plays. Miles Sanders hasn't played a snap with this offense. He's been hurt throughout training camp. 5,600 in this spot is a fade for me. I think that Miles Sanders is going to have other weeks where he's going to be in a better spot, and the more Bryce Young gets adapted to the NFL. And in this Atlanta offense, man, they have 900 pounds between their D tackle to D tackle. Like, that's going to be an issue for the Carolina Panthers to block, who have had issues in communication this preseason and allowed a lot of just free rushers and different things. I would love Miles Sanders against last year's Atlanta, but this is not last year's Atlanta. And he, at 5,600, even if he's talked about highly, I will be probably taking some unders on him and fading him on this slate. How do you feel about Miles Sanders?
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. There's a lot of names in this range that have more clear paths. We'll say not easier, but more clear paths to that 102 threshold that we talked about earlier. So yeah, I'm on board with that.
So one of the other guys that's in this tier, you have Khalil Herbert. I'm going to shout out myself. I was on a Pop Warner team with Khalil. I'm Facebook friends with the guy, so you better say nice things about Khalil Herbert, even if he's playing your Green Bay Packers.
No, I'm in. He is a guy that I was going to talk about as well in this tier as a viable option with his efficiency that he has shown historically against Joe Barry's Packers. Yeah, definite clear path to 102 there at a price of only 5.3.
No, nice. That was a quick to the point. Khalil Herbert is good at football there,
Easy
buddy.
day.
That's
Easy day.
That's a great one. But for me, we just saw the Jeff Wilson news. Obviously, he's going to IR in this tier. That makes up Raheem Mostert. This is the running back in this game. Chargers run defense is still not very good. They did add Eric Kendricks, which is going to help some things. But in particular, it's just he's going to get a lot of touches. I think the only running back on this roster that could take away goal line from him is an undrafted player from BYU named Chris Brooks. He is a bulldozer of a running back. I think that's the only player that I would be monitoring during the week. If he's active on the active roster and Mostert's getting a decent amount of, rostership, I'll probably pivot away from him. In this game, the Miami Dolphins are still going to throw the ball a ton. It's going to go to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But if you see Etienne stay out because of his shoulder AC joint sprain, and you see Jeff Wilson stay out Jeff Wilson is going to be out for this game, or Salvin Ahmed, who's another running back. It seems like Miami has a ton of them. I would be treating this team like it's the 49ers from a few years ago, and don't be surprised if Chris Brooks is their Elijah Mitchell week 1 against the Detroit Lions. How do you feel about that?
That's an interesting parallel. Based on preseason usage and who is familiar with the scheme and all that stuff, I would expect Salvon Ahmed to kind of be the fill-in, change of pace type guy. But yeah, you talk about this same idea of hitting 102. I think Raheem Mostert carries that as well, for sure in week 1, in this expected top game environment on the week.
Yeah, it's just a matter of how popular is he get with Jeff Wilson out. And
yeah,
again, Salvin and
probably
A-Chain,
a lot.
Yeah, Salvin and A-Chain are on the injury report. If both of them are not active, then it's pretty clear that they're going to ride with Mostert and probably Chris Brooks as their guy to short yardage and probably goal line situation. I know 102 is the way to go. Mostert can break the big runs against the Chargers, but if he's extremely popular, I'll be probably pivoting and going to the guy that you just wrote down on the sheet in Brian Robinson, who I thought he was going to be chalk. I thought he was going to be the chalky guy, but Gibson did enough in preseason that I think it's going to lower things. And then all these running backs that just opened up the door will probably pull away the rostership away from him. So tell me what you love about Ryan Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a breakaway runner. This is a kind of grinded out 5 to 7 yard type per carry is what we would need in this contest, because he's highly unlikely to see more than 16 to 18 overall touches. What I like from Brian Robinson is he could be transitioning more in this new offensive scheme away from the pure 16 to 18 rush attempts and maybe 1 or 2 targets to a guy that is used purely in conjunction with Antonio Gibson. So it looked like, based on preseason usage, that they were not separating these guys into defined roles. It was not the lead rusher and then the JD McKissic role. It was these guys were seeing a set of downs and then the other one would come in. And if that's the case, Brian Robinson has the ability to rack up enough receiving usage, say 3 receptions for 30 yards, to where now on a full PPR site, that removes the need for one of those touchdowns. So can he see 3 receptions for 30 yards, break 100 yards on 18 rush attempts, and then score 1? And my answer is probably yes, particularly against the Arizona Cardinals. So yeah, he's a guy that I think has that upside in him for week 1.
Yeah, and I mean, again, the Cardinals are just a dumpster fire right now. So this is a matchup where the game script's going to be in his favor. You talk about grinding it out. They're going to be in a spot where they're winning by a lot, and he's an easy running back to get to. And the last running back that I want to mention in this tier is Jamal Williams. Just became chalk because Kendre Miller is out. I know I've used the word chalk pretty frequently in the last 4 guys. It's just because this range is so interesting for week 1 because of the pricing coming out 2 months ago, and then Kamara getting suspended, and then Kendre Miller being ruled as a player, well, just having the hamstring injury. Jamal Williams against the Tennessee Titans, if he is getting a ton of popularity, he is a fade for me unless I am playing Derek Carr and Chris Olave and I go that unique running back, quarterback, receiver type stack. Just because the Titans have one good thing about their team. It's their run defense. Their run defense is going to be elite just because Mike Vrabel doesn't like when teams run the football against them. That secondary is going to be the problem. I think this is a great thing for me and you who have talked about Derek Carr and Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and some of these pass catchers in New Orleans, just because I think the Jamal Williams popularity is going to pull away from them. And it's going to make a unique opportunity to have a lower roster Derek Carr, lower roster Chris Olave, and a matchup that is fruitful to have a huge day, a 300-yard passing day, over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns for Olave type situation, and a running back that he's not scoring from 20 yards out. He is going to get 3-yard touchdowns, 2-yard touchdowns. That's just his MO. He's great at it. There's nothing wrong with being a great goal line back, but in DFS, I want my guys to catch passes. I want my guys to get a lot of looks. This isn't a spot for Jamal Williams, even with the injuries. I just think the Saints are going to rotate some other guys in there and get going with the passing game.
Yeah, so Jamal Williams, his career long, I believe, before last season in carry or yardage, a single yards gained in 1 carry was, I don't know why I choked on that, was like 36, 37 yards, somewhere in there. Double check me on that while I'm speaking. That was until week 17 when he ripped off a 51-yarder against the Bears, which then became his career high. This is a guy who scored 17 rushing scores last season and did not break 30 fantasy points all year in DraftKings scoring. His high was 26.9. So yeah, this is a guy where good for him if he sees 22 carries. He's going to need a lot to go right in his favor to break 100 yards rushing and score twice in this matchup.
His also career yards per carry is 4.0. Like, even if he gets 22 carries, he's only going to get, I'd project him for 80 yards. Like, that's fine. This is a good offensive line, but it's not better than Detroit, where he averaged, 4.1 yards per carry, 17 touchdowns last season. His career, he had 13. And he's been in the NFL for 6 years. So obviously last year he just kept scoring at will and frustrating me with Amon-Ra St. Brown lineups because I wanted Amon-Ra to get those touchdowns, but he kept getting tackled at the 1. And speaking of defenses, I think it's popular time. We're going to switch over to the defensive side of the ball. We each picked one team from this tier. First tier is 3,500 and up on DraftKings. You selected the Philadelphia Eagles as the defense you want to talk about. I'm not a pay up for defense type of guy. I know that you are not a pay up for defense type of guy, but in week 1, you have the salary to kind of get to this tier. So I'm interested to see what you have to say.
I'll amend with kind of what you said a little bit. I think that because, look at historical scoring in DFS. I'm not going to give you a heart attack, I promise. Look at historical scoring in a DFS format for defenses. It is the most variant position. And what that means is you compare like the way that people or teams or whatever score points in DFS. Defense is extremely driven by defensive touchdowns. Those are the hardest things to predict. All that we can do is basically pick defenses that we know are going to generate pressure in the backfield because that leads to turnovers, that leads to mistakes, sacks, strip fumbles, all those things. So if defensive scoring is the most variant, I typically am primarily basing my decisions off of two things: pressure and expected rostership. That's it. Like that's all we can control. The rest is kind of left over to variance. So because the general DFS population has this like growing stigma against paying up for defense, because if it's so variant, let me just pay down and I'll just get the points. That can work. But if we look at the scoring last season, we see that over 50%, I think it was 12 out of the 17 weeks, the optimal defense scored a defensive touchdown because that drives points. Well, the Philadelphia Eagles, you look at what they're coming off of. They're coming off of chasing the historical sack number last year. They just missed it, whatever the case may be. They are a team that likes to generate disruption in the backfield. And they're very, very good at it based on unique blitz packages. They don't blitz at an overly crazy rate, but they're able to win one-on-one. They're able to beat double teams, and they're able to do it on their own and get to the quarterback in the backfield. That's going to lead to mistakes. And now you look at the other side. Last time we saw the Patriots, they were largely anemic. Obviously, they have an offensive coordinator this year. They didn't last year. But it's just this case of like, I don't know, if the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be under 2% rostered, which could be the case in week one, it's like, why not go chase that pressure in the backfield? I don't know. Yeah, that's my spiel.
I mean, I don't think you're wrong at all for playing a defense against a team that their three wide receiver sets feature Juju and Devontae Parker and maybe Kendrick Bourne. A team that just signed their backup quarterback in Matt Corral. I believe he's probably going to be the one that backs up Mac Jones in this one. The Eagles didn't blitz. They rush 5 defenders quite often. They're switching defensive schemes to Sean Desai, but their 5-man front featured basically Fletcher Cox / Jordan Davis, Ndamukong Suh, Linval Joseph. This year, they just have a guy named, or Javon Hargrave. This year, they added Jalen Carter, which, the guy talked about watching a preseason tape on a guard that he was facing that week and then beat him and got his sack on the first play he was out there in the NFL. Jalen Carter was probably the top 2 talent in this NFL draft with him and Will Anderson. So they replaced Hargrave with probably a better one. Not right now at the moment, but probably in the future. And learning with that team, it's going to be ridiculous. And then Nolan Smith is bizarre how fast he is as a lower or skinnier type guy, but just gets after it. He was dominant in preseason as well. I do believe that you're right. Yes, you want to just basically play the low roster defense that has a high upside of a touchdown, and the way you get touchdown is pressure, which brings me to a team that's going to be blitzing a lot. The Minnesota Vikings, who, when I saw their price, I had my mouth dropped just because I was shocked that DraftKings was this far ahead of the curve of, oh, they have Brian Flores now. Oh, they're playing the Buccaneers who are starting Baker Mayfield. We are not going to make them under 3K, which there's a few defenses that I'm shocked that they made under 3K. But the Minnesota Vikings are in a spot, not necessarily going to get to them, but if I can afford them, I will 100% be after that price. Just because Baker Mayfield can throw that pick six. You have Tristan Wirfs, who's now changing positions, which he's a dominant player, but playing left tackle versus playing right tackle is a whole other ball game. It's not like Madden. You can just like make that big thing here. But in general, they're going to blitz the house. They're going to get after Baker. And there's a chance that he throws a pick six. Obviously, we just talked about Rashad White and some of the other players in this game. I think if you're building lineups and you don't get to that piece, obviously the Minnesota Vikings are in play. But overall, that's kind of how I feel with Brian Flores. He dominated bad quarterbacks when he was in Miami. It's a spot where it's not a top tier quarterback, so you could see a defensive score here. How do you feel about the Vikings at this price?
Yeah, I don't mind them at all. And they're very interesting also for the fact that they're kind of sandwiched between the Eagles and the most expensive defense on the week in the Ravens. And you look at what Houston is, rookie quarterback, their center is out, their guard is out to start the season. So a lot of interesting dynamics with that. So I would expect not as many people to get to Vikings that are looking to pay up in this tier, probably going to the Eagles and the Ravens.
So yeah, especially just, state of the game. It's just the Vikings last year, man. They're leaving a bad taste in their mouth, but there's just a whole new scheme, whole new defensive philosophy. And we are going to go to the 3,500 to 3,000 range now, which I'm going to kick it off to you, who you're taking the Jaguars, the defense that is probably one of the fastest in the NFL right now.
Yeah, if you're talking about a defense that has the tools to bottle up Anthony Richardson, it's probably the Jaguars, which is weird to say, just based on the speed that they have. And this comes down to obviously how do they maximize that speed against an athletic freak? How do they come out with their defensive front? How are they playing spy? What are they doing to contain Anthony Richardson to the pocket, making him make those throws? And we saw Anthony Richardson in the preseason make ill-advised throws when on the run, escaping the pocket, sailed a pass over, who was it? Jamison Crowder. Who was it? The diminutive wide receiver. Was it
That's Isaiah
JMO?
McKenzie.
Isaiah
McKenzie.
McKenzie. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. He left and then got signed back. That's right. Yeah, so this is a guy, rookie quarterback with his final preseason tune-up through 6 for 17. We know that that's kind of what to expect with him to start the season. But the big thing is that speed with the ability to kind of turn some expected chances for turnovers into defensive scores.
Completely agree with you on that front. I'll probably be game stacking that one, which but the upside of, again, we're looking for touchdowns. It's there with a rookie quarterback. And speaking of rookie quarterback, even as a Panthers fan, I think the 3,200 Falcons are an interesting play because of the way that we've blocked in preseason. What I told you about the additions that they made and the fact that, yeah, Bryce Young can make mistakes. I mean, it could be a factor of the receiver not getting open, but it would not surprise me if we see a house interception, just because there is no film out there besides preseason on what the Atlanta Falcons are doing as a defensive scheme. And even then, it's a very small sample because you did not see their starters play a ton. They have Jesse Bates. They have a young player in Richie Grant. They have AJ Terrell out there. They have the pieces to kind of be an aggressive defense and get after it. It's an interesting spot for the Falcons at 3,200, who I don't think are going to be popular just because of the name of the team and what they've done in years past. It's not 2022. It's not 2021. We are in 2023 now. So don't be afraid to play a defense that made a ton of improvements on that side of the ball. And I'll mention this team, not going to be a team that I go in depth on, but the Steelers, we talked about being a slugfest. Brock Purdy has looked good in preseason. He's looked comfortable. We talked about the 49ers offensive line not being great, and the Steelers probably the best pass rush in football. I know that we just talk highly of the Eagles. TJ Watt and what he does for this team with Alex Highsmith is going to be nasty. They made the right moves this offseason. I think they can really get after Purdy, which will make him very uncomfortable. Their defense, that I think, should be mentioned in this 3K range. But I'm going to kick it to you to talk about the chalk defense of the week, the Washington Commanders, which I still hate DraftKings for pricing him where they did.
Yeah, you threw him a bone talking about pricing up the Vikings, and then we get down here to the Commanders. Yeah, I mean, you look at the Washington Commanders, top 5, if not top 3 defensive line in the NFL right now. And then you look at the Cardinals, and it's like we still don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be. We know it's not going to be Kyler Murray, and we know it's not going to be any veteran with any like meaningful NFL snaps behind him. It's going to be Dobbs or it's going to be Clayton Tune. So not a lot extra to say other than, yes, this play looks like absolutely too good to be true on paper. But I'm going to kind of talk real quick about the other side to that. And it kind of plays into what we just talked about with defensive scoring being highly variant. If the Commanders come out, they sack whoever's starting for the Cardinals 5 times, we'll say. We'll give them 7. If they sack them 7 times and they allow 0 points, you're looking at 17 points right there. They had a turnover, 19 points. That is the absolute, I don't know, that's probably like a 70% outcome in this matchup. Maybe a little higher, maybe 80%. 19 points from defense. Is it possible that they land at the 30, 40% outcome in their range of outcomes, which is still strong, right? Yes. that 30 to 40% outcome looks something like 3 sacks with 1 turnover and 14 points allowed. Now you're talking they're struggling to pierce like 11, 12 points. That outcome can 100% be made up for by another defense at the position. So that's when it's very interesting to me. Like, yes, on paper, they have the strongest range of outcomes for week 1, and they're priced below 3K. That's a lot. That's like your cash game lock. You just move on. You play them in cash, you move on. In GPPs, where if a defense like Philly or one of the other defenses we talked about, if they score twice, if they score once and have 4 turnovers and 5, 6 sacks, like that is where you start getting into separator scores. And if you're talking about a 10-point differential at defense, that's a very, very strong advantage on any given slate. So while yes, like they're the top defense on the slate on a point per dollar perspective, any way you look at it, they just are. There are some interesting theoretical aspects to pull out that we typically, to me, I'm never going to be playing a chalk defense. It's just against my game theoretic religion. So if that's the case, like where else can I find access to a team that outscores them? Because we know that they're the strongest on paper point per dollar defense. So you need raw points. You need, once the first whistle blows, salary no longer matters. And now we're talking about raw points. I need access to more raw points. And I think we highlighted some ways to get there.
Yeah, and speaking of, defenses that you can necessarily get down to pivot off of them, obviously the above ones we talked about are a higher price, so outproducing them will have to be something that, happens just because the 200, 300, or even, 1100 in salary between Vikings and them is significant for how you can construct your lineup. But a defense that's cheaper that I think should be noted is the Las Vegas Raiders. They're not a great team on paper. I understand all the situations that have been going on, but Josh Jacobs is back. So that gives them a workhorse at the running back position that can control the clock. Jimmy Garoppolo, yeah, he's just a safety guy. He's not someone that's going to kill teams, but I think they're going to play with no tempo, so it's going to limit the idea of the Broncos having the ball. Broncos lost Jerry Jeudy for week 1, most likely. They're going to have Marvin Mims and Cortland Sutton out there, which is a fine receiving core. It's not one of the most dangerous ones all season, or dangerous ones in the NFL. Me and you have plenty of Mims shares for best ball, and this matchup's great, but 2,300 for the Raiders. The Broncos had 4 games last year where Russell Wilson / other quarterbacks were sacked 6 or more times. That is awful. I know the Broncos added players to their room. I know that Sean Payton is there, and it can help a lot of things. But again, there's still the odd possibility that Russell Wilson is broken. And if he is broken and this offense line can't block, they don't have Jerry Jeudy. Javonte Williams is coming off of a very big knee injury that he did play, but it wasn't exactly the most explosive Javonte Williams. I could see this not going too well. And again, 500 cheaper than the Commanders. They have Max Crosby. They have Chandler Jones. They have Tyree Wilson, who played in a preseason game and looked pretty good from that point of view. I think this is a spot where they can keep pace with the Commanders, possibly even outscore them. One of the, I guess, less chalky defenses in this range, in my opinion, which we will find out early next week. Hilo, do you have any thoughts on the Raiders?
I think it's theoretically fine. I won't be going there.
That's fine.
If I'm looking to differentiate, and that's because like you need 2 things to go right. You need the Commanders to fail, and you need Las Vegas to put up a respectable score at 2,300, because I kind of lump in my mind all the defenses sub 3K into this same tier. It's like, who is the best play sub 3K? It's the Commanders. An interesting pivot off of that, and this is almost a direct pivot, and this was brought up by a viewer, Manny Cuellar. Hopefully I pronounced that right, Manny. Yeah, the pivot to the Commander or to the Packers at the same price. Yes, Chicago is a vastly different offense. Yes, they've added some pieces and they're expected to score some pointages. But their offensive coordinator coached for 2-3 seasons at Green Bay. So Green Bay is intimately familiar. And Chicago's offensive line and quarterback decision-making led to them surrendering the most sacks last season, giving up the most defensive points against. So that's an interesting pivot from a direct pivot point. The problem with pivots, and I think that this is just from a theoretical perspective, the problem with pivots when we're talking about DFS and the rest of how roster construction happens is the rest of your roster can look extremely similar to everybody else's. And when we're expecting, I mean, I would not be shocked if we saw 40-45% Washington Commanders for week one, maybe even higher in some high dollar, low entry contests. If that's the case, I want to see how I can alter how I'm allocating salary so that I know if the Commanders fail, if they land at their 30% range, and I hit one of those defenses that just from a pure raw points perspective outscores them, now I have almost just vaulted over half of the field in how both my raw points and how my roster is constructed, which is the important part for thinking about how we beat the remainder of the field. The teams that do a direct pivot in the same pricing tier, they are now still having to fight against rosters that look rather similar from a roster construction standpoint, which is, I mean, it's a lot of moving pieces because we're working with 9 roster spots, but just from a theoretical sense of how do I maximize my expected value when I get things right, that is typically the way to do it, is to alter how the pieces come together in this puzzle that we're trying to build and solve.
I completely with you on that side of things. I think the Packers that Manny brought up are a great pivot. I think it's just the only thing that concerns me is the dropbacks that we'll see from Fields and the offense of the Packers forcing them to pass. Because even last year, man, that week 2 game that was like on a Sunday night, I was so just tired of watching the Bears run the ball when you guys were up by like 3 scores at halftime, and they were still running the ball against you. It was like, dude, this isn't going well. Why are we?
No, you don't get it. Come on, you're supposed to pass.
Yeah, so that's a DJ Moore, and this one will be probably change things up. But I agree that they're a pretty good pivot off of the Commanders' defense. But that is all that we have for today's show. The Cover 5 show will be released on Saturdays during this season. Me and Hilo will be recording most likely Friday night and releasing these on Saturday. It's going to be slate driven. We're going to be breaking down 5 games from a DFS perspective, hence the name Cover 5. Be sure to check out all of Hilo's articles throughout the week. I will be frequently posting some things. I have a main slate tournament article coming out on Saturdays. Be sure to follow Hilo at HiloFF on Twitter. That's where he'll be posting all his stuff. I will be posting mine at Jordan Vanek DFS. If you follow one of us, most likely the other will retweet one another's stuff. So we will be supporting each other. Hilo, do you have anything else before we close the show?
Yeah, dude. We have a robust slate of stuff that we're going to be doing for 33rd. So if you want to get access to all that, obviously follow us. Like Jordan shouted, you'll see a weekly recap lineup breakdown for me coming Mondays. You'll see a overall theoretical concept driven article looking back on the previous week on Tuesday. You'll also see Jordan and I together on Saturdays, like he talked about. But on Friday, you'll also see an article from me built around the chalk on the slate. So check that out. That'll be exciting.
I cannot wait for the season, man. I'm excited for it. And be sure to join our Discord, and we'll be starting some chats about DFS this upcoming week. Hilo, thank you so much, and I will see you later.